So next, I'm privileged to introduce a visionary in the realm of feed safety, and he will enlighten us on the importance of feed safety, of course. He's the Technical and Innovation Director at Selko USA, bringing a world of knowledge and also innovative strategies to enhance the feed safety standards. And join me in giving him a big round of applause. His name is Marcos Rostagno. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
There you go. And again, of course, people both at home and also here in Bangkok, if you have your question, should you have a question, put it in the Mentimeter. Floor is yours, Marcos.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Good afternoon for everyone in the room. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for the ones online, wherever you are around the world. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I hope you also enjoy the content, what we have to share. I've been learning a lot watching the other speakers. But now it's time for us to shift our mind a little bit. Okay? My goal here today is to give you a sense or an overview of feed safety, a different aspect of what we were talking until now. We've been talking about a lot of the plant itself, the equipment, the efficiency, how you maximize really the factory mindset, right? The manufacturing mindset. Here is my focus to shift you to understanding the later impact that feed will have after you produce, or during what happens during that production, what's going to happen in the other stages of the business. But for that, we need to first understand what exactly is our business, right? Our business, we tend to focus heavily on the animals. We tend to focus in my case, I focus more on monogastrics, poultry and swine. But we have to understand that these animals, what I usually call them, these are transforming machines, right? They intake the corn, the soybean, whatever ingredients you use in your feed, right? And they transform that into the final product, which is actually our business. It's actually what we are doing. So that is very important to keep in mind, to understand that it's not just about the animal, it's what the animal is going to produce, where this is going. And you're going to understand that in a second why. Because we need to understand that there is increasing demand. In the introduction, Antoniel brought that up. We have these targets, these numbers, these estimates. They're made about 2050, how many billion more people will be, all that. But it's not just that. It's not just having more people in the same planet. It's that people, well, even though we always have that impression that life sucks, life is bad, things are difficult, it's not. It's getting better and better and better, right? Ask someone, I'm not that young anymore, but ask someone that's been in this world for a few decades, and you know how the world has changed, how it continues to change, how it is getting better, how we have access to many more things that we didn't have before, right? One of them is food. And within food, specifically, animal protein is the other one. So much so that whenever, and there are plenty of studies and statistics showing that, whenever someone makes a little bit more money, gets an increase, gets a bonus, gets whatever, first thing they're going to do is spend that money improving their quality of food, which means increasing intake of animal proteins. There is no other source like this of proteins, amino acids, and nutrition like we have, right? So this is very important to understand what we do. But what does exactly we want? Because we're consumers. What do we want? What defines what our product, what we're going to buy? When you go to the grocery store, to the restaurant, you're looking basically to three things. These are the drivers globally of food consumption. One is we eat because we want that to be nutritious. We want that to be promote our health, to take care of our bodies, right? That's why we pick this. But we also want it to be affordable. If it's not affordable, I'm going to start making concessions, say, well, I'm not going to eat this, I'm not going to eat that. I'm going to become a little bit more picky what I'm going to buy. So that's the second point. And the third point is I want to have these two, but I want to be safe. I want to eat without worrying that I may get sick, all right? So these are the three drivers. Then on top of those, you have what I call the feel good. The feel-good is the sustainability, the animal welfare, which means I want to have these three, knowing that once I reach those three, I'm also helping the resources, the planet. My food is produced in an ethical way, treating well the animals and so on, right? That's how consumers understand or think about food. So this is very important. In that sense, what is food safety? What do we understand by food safety? It has to be, and these are definitions, official definitions, WHO, USDA, European Commission, whatever, you can look them up. But basically it's the production of food with no or low risk of hazards, right? Such as any biological, physical, or chemical contaminants that can cause any harm to the humans consuming it. That's the basic concept. Eat something that does not have a hazard or was not going to be a threat to my well-being, okay? So food safety is part of food quality. When we talk quality, quality is a relative concept. It depends what's your end goal. What is quality for one company, one feed mill, may not be the exact same standard as another company, another feed mill. It depends what your business looks like, what's your target production, where you position your product, and so on. But food safety is part of that food quality. The same thing applies to feed, right? Remember, we are producing food. We are part of that chain. So when you think in that mindset, that we are producing food, that we are supplying consumers that have safety in their minds, right? What happens is feed safety becomes part of food safety. It is an integral part, and it will continue to increase. It will become more and more important. Other point to understand, there are three basic resources or inputs that we provide the animals that we take care of. They need air, they need water, and they need feed. That's it. If you don't give them those three in adequate amounts and conditions, forget about the rest. It won't work. They can have all the genetic potential. You can invest all you want in the formulation of your diet. You can build the best facilities. But if they don't get these three, they're not going to express that potential. You're not going to maximize the resources that you invest in that production, right? So feed is very important. And interesting enough, these are the three components that we neglect the most in animal production. We invest a lot of money on a lot of other things, and we usually neglect these three basic things that we have to pay attention. Now, when we look, as I told you, on food safety and how feed safety fits in that, the world is changing, right? We live in a world that continues to change, and then probably we are living through an age where this change is being accelerated. Things are changing faster, all the time, faster and faster. Food safety or feed safety is improving and changing as well, which not too many years ago, the main focus was in processing retail, what we call post-harvest, after the animals leave the farm. And I'm talking 10, 15 years the most, right? Food safety was all about that. And the processing plant, and the food, and the restaurant, retail, at home, all that stuff. Then it started moving backwards, about 10, 15 years ago. Started coming back to the farm. Oh no, now we have to pay attention pre-harvest, because what comes into the plant comes from the farm. The animals are bringing that. Now we are taking another step back, which is including the feed mill. Okay, what comes in that animal affects that animal carries that to the processing plant, that goes to the retail and goes to the consumer, right? Now, why did I highlight that red box on the slide? Because that's where we, in the pre-harvest, that we in the animal production, the food production, where we focus the most. So it's not just the farm, it's the feed mill, the ingredients that we're going to start talking about, right? But we're still far away of the first step in that chain. And guess what? It's not going to take many years. We're going to have to go there. I'll give you a few examples in the presentation today, but it's not too far. I do believe that pretty soon, that red box that is under our responsibility here, it's going to expand toward that, and we're going to have to go back to the ingredients. And what happens in this box is basically what? Feed contamination, cross-contamination, or recontamination. One of these three always happens along the chain. So what are the most common contaminants of feed? There are basically three categories. One is biological or microbiological type of contamination. Right? We're talking about microbes, bacteria. Some examples you have there on the screen. E. coli, Salmonella, Clostridium, so on and on. Fungi. And of course, they are toxins, the mycotoxins. Right? Then you have yeast, and then you have viruses. And I can imagine some people thinking, viruses? We're going to get there. Right? Then you have chemicals, residues of pesticides, environmental contaminants, PCBs, dioxins, and on and on. Right? Then, if you separate fungi from their toxins, you have mycotoxins. So they fit in both categories here. I like to treat them, and we're going to talk about them a little bit on the biological or microbial contamination. And then you have the physical, which are any strenuous material, right? Nails, screws, metal fragments, rings, earrings, or whatever, any strenuous material that can end up on that feed somehow, somewhere, right? So we're going to focus here, for the purpose of this presentation, on the biological and microbial contaminants, which is what we deal with, the areas that we work more closely on our day-to-day basis. So one thing that we also have to understand, and we tend to focus a lot on, is how feed affect especially young animals. And the animals that we produce, in this case, monogastrics, poultry, and swine, they're very young animals. Even when they're ready for harvest, they are still considered young animals. Right? So they're very susceptible to a huge range of factors that can influence any of their processes. But when we think about feed, we think about the ingredients you put in that feed, the particle sizes, right? The form, if it's mashed, it's crumbled, if it's pelletized, if it's liquid, fermented or not, all these things. We know that all that affects the animal, right? The functioning of the GI tract and so on. A lot of people don't understand that the microbial populations on that feed, which is the types of microorganisms and the levels of microorganisms that are in that feed, also have an impact on those animals. And that's something that is relatively more recent. We've been focusing more and more on pathogens that we want to cut the transmission chain, but we are learning as we evolve, and you will see a little bit more in a second. But any of these factors will affect how the intestinal tract of these animals function physiologically, how microbiologically the populations, the ecosystem, which I call in the intestinal tract, will shape, because they are born, they have to develop in a short period of time all their microbiota, and they have to be ready for slaughter in the end, and then how their immune system responds to that situation. So this is an interesting study that I found recently. Don't worry, I'm not going to get you to look at all the details or memorize all that. But just to exemplify, on the far right, on the box on the right, you have that Venn diagram. This is one of the key points here. Each one of those circular shapes or elliptical shapes, it's the microbiota defined in a different sample size. And they are, for instance, the red one is the cecal content of a chick. Then the gray one is the microbiota detected in the feed. The yellow-orangish is in the ileum, and the blue one is in the excreta, in the feces, right? So you know the concept of the diagram. When they overlap, it means there is match, right? So they collect the samples from the feed, from the ingredients, from the feed, and from the birds, and analyze the microbial populations. And as you can see, these elliptical forms, they overlap. They started finding that the feed, before the animal ingested, or the ingredients, they already have populations of bacteria or microorganisms that were found later in the gut of these animals, right? When you look on the left side, this all-colored graph here, each one of them represents a different sample type. Barley, corn, soybean, anything. Different colors, it's the abundance of different species in that sample. So it shows you, I just wanted visually to show you that ingredients have their own microbial populations. And it's not just, oh, they're contaminated with one microorganism. No, They have a whole microbiota. They have a mix of populations there. And we are just starting to scratch that surface. We're just starting to understand there's very little investigated, very little published. But just to show that these ingredients, they do have an impact, and it's important to understand that. I predict this is going to grow a lot in the next few years. So if I had to, let's say, Marcos, you have to get off this stage now. We're done. You have to. What is the impact that we're thinking about this? Well, the impact of these microbial contaminants is one. They will impact your GI tract with a reduce the growth performance. How? Well, they're going to damage the intestinal tract if they are not common residents, or even if they don't cause any damage, they're external microorganisms, they're going to trigger an immune response, usually an inflammatory response. Well, that has a cost for the animal. So at least something is going to happen. Remember, that animal was born, it's in a very clean environment, and all of a sudden it's exposed to a whole range of different microorganisms that come with the feed, right? And or that can stop there, or it can evolve. If it's a pathogen, the levels are high, the animal is more susceptible, then that can advance and become a disease, right? Then you have what? Pathogens, then you have more damage, and then mortality and bigger losses, right? Now, another point, either way, that you're going to have is you're going to have to invest more in antibiotics. You're going to have to use antibiotics more to treat those animals. And in fact, a lot of the preventive or growth-promoting antibiotics that were used for many, many years, in reality, we're covering up a lot of these. Nowadays, a lot of places, you can't do that anymore, right? So there is an impact. You have to start more. So if I had to sort this out, I usually tell that when we think in production, you think what? Nutrition, feed is my main cost, right? Depending on where you are in the world, 65 to 80% of your production will be feed cost, right? But then you have the losses you have in your system. The same way we're talking about a plant, a factory, right? Your equipments and your points of attrition. In the animals, is the same thing. You have points that you're going to lose as you go through the process. And usually, the most common points are related to what? Disease, problems or immune response, energy, nutrients that the animal will use or divert to deal with those challenges. They're going to have to move that away from what? From performance, from growth, right? Because they need to survive. It's a mechanism, natural mechanism of these animals. The other point that people don't understand is even if I don't have loss in the animal, or most cases I'll tell you, it's not that you don't have, as you can see. But it doesn't mean it's not there. It's just because the way we measure, most of the time, it's not sensitive enough to pick up those little differences. But let's say it's a foodborne pathogen. Let's use Salmonella as an example. You have Salmonella infecting these animals. Let's say you don't have anything or you don't see anything in performance, mortality, disease. What other costs can that have on my system, on my production, right? Well, that increases the risk of foodborne disease and outbreaks, people that consume that chicken, that pork, whatever it is. If that happens, there's a huge business impact. Why? First, if it's detected, it needs to be recalled. Any recall carries a lot of headaches, carries a lot of cost for your company, for your business, right? Let's say you go ahead and you have several cases. Someone will sue you. And if they can trace it back to your product, you're liable. You're going to have costs in that too, right? Then let's say nothing like that, nobody sues you, anything. The way information spreads nowadays, your brand equity is at risk because people will start posting, will start talking about your brand. I ate this chicken and I got sick. That spreads like wildfire. It's unbelievable. The way, as we were talking before, the world moves fast. Communication information doesn't have boundaries. That goes everywhere. So that is very important, how that will impact your brand, right? And then on top of that, depending on the model of business that you have, where you're going to put your product, you're still going to have market access issues. Maybe you're exporting to certain markets, and then that container hit the port, they collected samples, Salmonella positive, shut it down, send it back. That has a domino effect in your chain, right? Or you just simply because you had certain frequency of positive samples, you were not eligible to export to certain markets, or certain big companies do not want to buy your product, right? So all these are financial business direct impacts that a simple pathogen in the feed can cause to your business, to your company. Well, some people still question, yeah, salmonella or other pathogens can have an impact in production. There is a study done a few years ago. Don't worry about the numbers or reading the table, it's just an example. But they did some meta-analysis looking at several studies where they use artificial infection, experimental models, and they want to quantify. And they showed clearly that Clostridium, E. coli, and Salmonella, they all have impact on performance. In this case, their effects were too high from what I see in the field. These are experimental infections, young animals, high doses, but there is an effect. At a minimum, if you don't have a disease, as I mentioned before, you're going to have issues like innate immune response activation, nutrients being repartitioned to different functions in the body. Remember, growth is not an essential biological demand for the animal. Survival takes priority. So if the animal is challenged, it will trigger immune response, it will divert that energy, those amino acids, everything in the immune system as proteins, antibodies, cytokines, whatever, always proteins. Those amino acids need to come from somewhere. They're going to come from their diet. Instead of going to the meat, to the muscle, it's going to go to that function to survive, right? Depending on the level of infection you have feed intake reduction. When you're not feeling well, what happens first? You lose your appetite. It's a survival mechanism. You don't want your body ingesting food and having your GI tract working hard to digest that and burning more energy. You start reducing your intake. Animals do the exact same thing, right? So that's very, very important to understand. Then I mentioned to you viruses. A lot of people don't talk about viruses. This is a big, big issue in the United States today, right? And you can see a lot of studies and papers. Started around 2013, 14 with PED, porcine epidemic diarrhea. Remember when that thing hit the US swine industry? It almost broke the industry. Well, they trace it back to feed. That triggered a whole line of studies in there. So they've been finding African swine fever in feed ingredients. They've been finding avian influenza. So it's becoming big, right? It's growing for now. It's primarily in the academic, technical role, but this is going to expand. This is going to grow more and more with all these viral disease. So be aware that this is coming. It's an area very important. It's being shown and proved multiple times, as you can see in those papers, that it can be transmitted, can be persisting in a farm through the feed. And it's not that it has animal ingredients. These are corn, soybean-based diets, okay? Mycotoxins, a brief mention on this. As I said, we have many different types of mycotoxins. This is a very complex area. You can see by this, these are slide graphs, illustrations from the global survey that our company does. And a few weeks ago, it was reported from last year. And you can see in one side, in the top side, you have the poultry feed. In the bottom, the graphs are swine feed. And you can see different types of feed. Incidence is relatively high. You can find it. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to find it. You don't have to collect a whole lot of samples. You will find it. It's there. We all know, right? So it's important to keep in mind that mycotoxins are there. How can they affect? How they impact the animal production? One is direct effects. That could be mycotoxicosis or toxicity, depending on the levels and the species you're talking about. Even if you don't have toxicity levels, but usually you can find easily, all you have to do is do some posting sessions in poultry, and you will find gizzard lesions, basal tongue lesions. You know those are mycotoxins, very easy to identify. Done that quite a bit in my life. Physiological and endocrinological effects, functionality of the body. We know a lot of these mycotoxins do affect certain levels of physiological processes in the body, right? And then the indirect effect. Those lesions or tissue damage will predispose to pathogens. Or mycotoxins are known for having an effect on the immune system, which will increase colonization, excretion, dissemination. Remember, we're dealing with populations of animals. A few animals that start excreting more pathogens, that spreads really quickly in those populations that we're raising. And of course, frequency of disease. So here are two quick examples to show you. On your left, you have they have the control on the base bar, and then the other was different types of mycotoxins or combinations of Coccidia oocyst in mucosa or being shed in the feces. And it shows how it is spread, it increases with mycotoxin exposure. The graph on the right, just the first four columns are the interest, the other ones are intervention they were testing, but you have the control. These are levels, score lesions, microscopic lesions for necrotic enteritis. So the first one is control, second one just the mycotoxins, third one is Clostridium challenge, fourth one, the red one, mycotoxin with Clostridium. Lesions go high, more severe cases. Let's speed up because we're getting close. If I had to summarize in a single slide the effects of these contaminants, this is what I could come up with. You can start on the far left with ingredient quality caused by damage of these components. Then you have the non-pathogenic microorganisms, then the pathogens, then you have the foodborne pathogens, then you have the mycotoxins, and all the different implications they can have. So visually, you can see the complexity of the feed safety, feed quality, feed contamination, how it can affect your animals in your production, right? Common sources, primary source usually is raw materials and ingredients. It's by far. But then you have the conditions where you're going to store them. Not only that can favor multiplication of these microorganisms, but also they can favor cross-contamination or initial contamination there, right? The equipment they're going to use, those equipments are all planned by engineers, not by microbiologists. So it's tough, it's difficult to clean really. So they are usually the primary source of persistence of cross-contamination during the process, right? So the feed mill hygiene and the sanitation protocols are extremely important. They have to do it. Not easy, not cheap, but they have to be done, right? Additives, supplements, byproducts, there are plenty of reports of them bringing in, if they're not of good quality, good source, they'll bring in contaminants as well. Then there is the whole loading and transportation, right? Especially in some countries, some places where I still see bagging or handling of these bags, the increase of probability to contaminate this is huge. Is really, really big. The trucks also are a common source of contamination. They keep driving back and forth the farms, feed after feed after feed. And in the farm also, once it leaves the feed mill, it doesn't mean it's done. And the farm is also important to have that in mind. So there are plenty of interventions that we can go through. Time is running low. But the most important, if I have to highlight here, is the first one. The three key words, biosecurity, biosecurity, and more biosecurity. You will never, ever overdo biosecurity. Forget it. You're always going to be short somewhere because with a strong biosecurity program, you will pick up a lot of sources of contamination. Then you can go through each one of them. The other one that I would like to highlight here is just a matter of time, personal training and education. And I emphasize and education. It's not just training, just saying, do it this way. It's telling them why we're doing it this way, why this is important. That is key. If that doesn't happen, it will be forgotten and it becomes a simple procedure. It's done mechanically, right? So basically, you have to follow a HACCP principle. The same thing you do in any processing plant is the same thing you have to do in your feed mill, same thing you have to do in your farm, right, with the animals. Identify the risk, the hazards. Where are they? What are the chances? What's going on? How do I control, interfere, apply them, monitor? Is it working? Is it not working? Why is it not working? What do I have to fix? What do I have to do then? Verify, record everything, right? Record keeping is important. If it's not recorded, it will be forgotten. You can't trace it back. You can't go back. You can't evaluate. So that is very, very, very important to keep in mind. So the key thing here today is we need to change our mindset. When we talk about feed safety, right, a lot of focus is on cost. Oh, this is costing me. I need to invest on this. I need to spend money on this. I need to implement that. I need to use this. We have to switch that. You saw, and that was my goal, to show that feed risk, contaminants, they have an impact. So it's an opportunity to improve my system. It's an opportunity to not lose money, not just gain money, not lose money, stop the drain of my money, right? So that's an opportunity cost, and that is a say that Charles Munger, one of the smartest investors in the world, passed away last year at 96. He used to say, intelligent people make decisions based on opportunity costs, right? And so this is very important. I appreciate your time. The thing that we have to keep in mind, as I mentioned in the beginning, feed is the main cost of production. So why compromise on its quality, right? That's the bottom line message. If you have to remember something, that I want you to remember when you go home, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcos. Please stay with us because we have a few questions already here. This one was already answered. Yes, we have a couple of them. Let's start with this one. A lot of antibiotic premix could be harmful on human health, and how to use less dosage for grower-finisher feed. Yeah, because we have a lot of...
Yep. This is a very broad topic,
yes,
right?
Therefore.
We're talking about antibiotics from the human health, but also remember, it's important for the animal health as well, because if they're overused in animals, then we can treat them over time because they're going to become resistant.
And we have this antimicrobial resistance that we want to worldwide actually. Yeah.
So basically, a lot of the things that we would do thinking on the feed mill controlling contaminants, you have to do it at the farm level to reduce challenge for the animals, so then you don't need to use as much antibiotics as you should, right? So biosecurity, populational density, water quality, ventilation, right? All the feed quality, nutrition, right? All these things, do the basics. There are long lists of activities. We can go on. This is a topic for a whole workshop or event.
Could be another event, yes.
But in general, you have to take care of all these other factors, have a specific antibiotic reduction program, which will involve many different factors in there, so you have less need for that antibiotic. It's not just, we're going to take the antibiotic out. What do I prepare? What do I need to do to prepare so I don't need to use as much antibiotic? Then I can start removing that antibiotic. I hope that's the line of question.
Bottom line, yes, thank you. Next question. Feed safety can be challenging to apply fully in some plants. What would be your biggest advice or the most important point to look after?
First, it is difficult, particularly if you have, like in the previous speaker, there were some questions about old plants, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I understand that. It's a big investment. Any company, when they build a feed mill, they're investing millions of dollars, right? They want to use it as long as they can. So you're going to go to this feed mill, they are 30, 40, 50 years old, or even more, right? It's difficult, as I said. The plants are planned by engineers, not by microbiologists. So you will have issues, right? As we evolve, it's getting better. So especially when you have these old feed mills or things like that, first thing you do is to assess your situation. Anytime you want to reduce or control a risk, right? Remember, risk is a probability of a hazard happening. Okay, you know what's your hazard. It's a microbial contamination. What is my status now, and what is my risk? Where are the critical points on my system? But a point that I can highlight that I always call attention, I think we don't do enough, is, as I mentioned in the beginning, the ingredients, the raw materials. Mm-hmm. That is the initial source of contamination. That's when everything starts coming in, right? So we tested. Oh, yeah, I visit so many customers. Oh, we tested. Okay, and when it gets positive, what happens? Well, by the time it gets positive, it's already, when it went through the system. It's gone, right? Because it took 2 or 3 days to get the results. Well, we're going to have to change that mindset, and it's not going to take long. So if you have to start somewhere, yeah, you have the general biosecurity there, but you have to start in the source of your contamination. Identify your main source. I'll give you an example. Globally, today, I can tell you easily between 5 and 10% of the batches of soybean meal you bring in your feed plant are Salmonella positive. So imagine that coming in through the whole year in your system. If you don't do anything, you're going to spend a lot of money and your problem will still be there.
Let's do the final question for now, reminding, of course, that we will collect all the unanswered questions. Yes, somebody asked, how is the trends, whether it's a trend or not, leave it up to you, the trends of the veggie. Of course, how do you, from the feed industry perspective, look to that, and how will it influence the future of the industry? Will it influence?
I'm thinking here two different ways here of this question.
Yeah.
One can be the humans' consumption, or it can be all vegetable diets for animals, right? Which it's growing and it's going to continue to grow, right? I'll tell you in the United States, Latin America in general, I would tell easily over 80% of all the feed produced for swine and poultry, it's all vegetable, no animal ingredient at all. And they put there very strong in their labels and everything. But in the human side, there is a push for that. I know vegetables are good for your health, but I don't believe you can live based on a single type of diet base, right? We need this mix of ingredients, right? We need, as I told you, the quality. There is no equivalent of the quality of the protein and amino acids you get in meat or animal products, because I'm a big fan of eggs as well, right? So yeah, you can do, but I tell people, and I have adult young children, I tell them, their friends, oh, he's a vegan or whatever. I say, make sure, they're not, but they have friends, and I tell, make sure you take your supplements and do your things. So if you have to supplement, it means you're missing something. So you want to do it, it's your choice, but be very, very careful. The trend, I don't see it as dominant, because as I showed you, the consumption of animal protein is predicted to continue to grow. So it's a niche. It will reach a plateau, and it stays in that range. That's what I expect.
So it will stay in the mix, actually. That's what you say?
Yes.
But it won't be the dominant factor
I don't
in the
believe
near
so.
future. Okay.
I don't believe so.
A lot of questions raised, but time's up for now.
That's
and
good.
I would like to invite you over for the panel discussion after the break. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Marcos
so much.
Rostagno. Thank you.